The morning light slid through the tall office windows in thin, pale streaks, catching dust motes that drifted between polished wood panels and deep blue leather. The millionaire sat at his desk, shoulders locked, eyes narrowed at the document beneath his hand. His expression stayed firm and unreadable, the kind of focus that came from years of command. Years of people waiting for his signature to decide their fate. But today, something unexpected shifted the whole room's balance. A small child clung to him. The boy's face pressed gently against the man's shoulder. Tiny fingers curled into the expensive fabric of that royal blue suit. His expression carried quiet peace, eyelids soft, mouth relaxed, with an ease he rarely showed around strangers. Anyone watching could see it instantly. This was not a moment forced or accidental. It was instinct. A child seeking safety where no one expected it. Behind them, the cleaning lady froze mid-step. Her hands rose automatically, yellow gloves trembling in the air. Her face held a mixture of shock and fear. The type that comes from living too long at the bottom of a hierarchy where even honest mistakes can ruin someone's life. She didn't speak. Her eyes darted between her son and the man whose signature could change entire departments, entire futures. Her body stayed rigid, breath caught in her chest, waiting for something to snap. The office air thickened, still and heavy like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every polished surface reflected an imbalance of power, tailored wealth on one side, working-class exhaustion on the other, and in the middle, a child choosing where to feel safe, breaking every unspoken rule of distance. Class and control. The millionaire did not react immediately. His pen hovered above the page, held steady only by habit. A faint crease formed between his brows, not of annoyance, but confusion. Something old flickered behind his eyes, something he wasn't ready to name. A soft murmur escaped the boy, barely audible, but the sound unsettled something deep inside the room. It was a moment too strange, too intimate, too wrong for how their world was supposed to work. And yet it was only the beginning. Something in the millionaire's face shifted just enough to hint that the child's reaction wasn't an accident at all. The boy's small fingers tightened gently around the millionaire's shoulder, and that tiny gesture sent a quiet tremor through the room. The cleaning lady Maria lowered her hands a little, but her expression stayed tense, the kind of tension shaped by years of trying not to be noticed. Her eyes blinked fast as memories rose uninvited, piecing together a history that the man at the desk had no reason to see. Maria had been working in this building for almost 3 years. Every day she moved silently through the polished hallways before sunrise, wiping down surfaces she could never afford, arranging objects she would never own. Her shifts were long, her pay barely enough. But she accepted it because stability ain't stability was a rare victory for a single mother. Her son, Liam, had been different from birth. Gentle, observant, unusually sensitive to strangers. Ever since he was old enough to cling to her shirt, he never let anyone else approach him. Not neighbors, not relatives, not friendly coworkers who offered warm smiles and extended arms. He pulled away from everyone, burying his face into her neck, the moment an unfamiliar presence came near. Except today, Maria's thoughts swirled and panicked. Circles as she stood frozen near the doorway. She remembered all the mornings she brought Liam quietly into the building because childcare cost more than her weekly groceries. She always kept him close, always made sure he stayed far from the high-profile executives, walked these halls with polished shoes and polished lives, especially this one, the millionaire. Mr. Alden Royce carried a presence that bent every room. People stepped aside when he walked past. Even senior managers straightened when his gaze brushed them. Maria avoided him more than anyone else, not because he was cruel, because people like him lived in a world that could erase people like her without ever noticing. So why now? Why did her son, who wouldn't step near a smiling receptionist, cling to a man who barely noticed the staff unless necessary? Across the room, Mr. Royce drew a slow breath. Something flickered again, an echo of recognition he couldn't place. A moment passed. Too quiet, too heavy, and the imbalance began to crack. Mr. Royce finally lifted his eyes toward Maria confused, unsettled. For a split second, something in his expression looked almost familiar. Mr. Royce's gaze lifted fully now, slow and deliberate. The way a man looks when something refuses to match the logic he lives by. His expression didn't show anger, but uncertainty and emotion so rare on his face that it made the room feel suddenly smaller. The pen in his hand lowered to the desk. His posture straightened just a little, enough for Liam to readjust his small arms around the man's neck, as if settling into a place he already believed was safe. Maria's breath hitched. Her fingers curled into the edges of her gloves as she stepped just once forward. She didn't want to intrude. She didn't want to make noise. She didn't want to trigger irritation in a man whose silence could cost her a month's wage. But a mother's instinct overrode everything else, even fear. Her expression betrayed worry before anything else. Her lips parted slightly. Her shoulders stiffened. Her knees bent as if she might reach out and reclaim her son. But she didn't. She couldn't. The hierarchy between them kept her rooted. Across the room, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable, an unspoken tension building beneath the surface. It's like the feeling before a storm that hasn't yet shown its wind. Mr. Royce glanced down at the boy again. His brow tightened. Something about Liam's small palms against his suit drew lines across his memory hollow, blurred lines that refused to sharpen. He looked back at Maria with a question sitting heavy in his stare, though he didn't voice it. He didn't need to. She felt it anyway. Why him? Why this child? Why now? Maria forced her shoulders back, trying to hold on to the one thing she always controlled: composure. But inside, panic brushed against her ribs. She remembered the supervisor's warnings. She remembered how quickly workers disappeared from schedules after one misunderstanding with upper management. And she remembered the one thing she promised Liam every night: that she would protect him from every uncertainty in a world that didn't want to see them. And yet here he was, clinging to the one man she feared most. The silence stretched. Heavy, questioning, unbalanced. Everything felt like it was leaning toward something they couldn't name. And then Mr. Royce slowly pushed back his chair, turning fully toward the child. As if bracing to face a truth he didn't yet understand, the chair eased back with a soft scrape across the polished floor, a sound so small, yet so startling, that Maria's heart skipped. Mr. Royce turned just enough for the morning light to catch the edges of his face, revealing something almost unseen in him, a subtle tightening around the eyes. A flicker of strain hidden beneath practiced calm. Liam adjusted his legs on the millionaire's shoulder, settling with a familiarity that made the moment feel impossibly intimate. Maria's breath stilled again. Her body leaned forward instinctively, but she stopped herself halfway, fingers trembling against the side of her apron. She didn't want to appear frantic. She didn't want to look disrespectful. But the fear rising inside her had nothing to do with protocol anymore. It was instinct meeting the unknown. Mr. Royce studied the child quietly. His eyelids lowered for a moment, as if trying to chase a thought he didn't fully trust. Something faint, something painful, passed across his expression. Not anger, not discomfort. Something else. A recognition without a memory. A shadow of a feeling long buried beneath years of polished meetings and empty victories. His shoulders rose in a slow, controlled breath. His gaze drifted to Liam's small face, then back to Maria, searching for an explanation she wasn't ready to give. Her posture stiffened further, chin tucked slightly.
Yes.
A gesture of someone accustomed to being accused before being understood. The environment around them felt still too still. The painted landscape on the wall, the heavy shelves filled with untouched books, the thick air that carried unspoken rules. Everything stood frozen, as though the room itself sensed an imbalance in its hierarchy. Mr. Royce's fingers twitched, resting on the desk before curling inward, as though bracing for something he once tried to forget. His mind pulled him somewhere else, somewhere dim and distant. A woman's quiet voice. A small child's cry. Papers being signed in haste. Regret swallowed before it had a chance to breathe. But the memory broke apart before it became real, leaving him unsettled, frustrated by an emotion he couldn't name. Across the room, Maria's eyes widened slightly, not because she understood his thoughts, but because she recognized the expression. It was the look of someone remembering something important, or someone, the tension tightened, thread by thread. For the first time, Mr. Royce whispered a question under his breath so quietly Maria almost missed it. The sound carried the weight of a truth no one was prepared to face. Maria heard it not clearly, not fully but enough. A faint murmur slipping from the millionaire's lips, the kind of whisper a man voices when his mind is fighting itself. Her body went cold. Her feet stayed planted, but her hands shifted instinctively toward Liam. Stopping halfway in the air, as if touching the moment would shatter something fragile, Liam's face remained soft against the millionaire's shoulder. His breathing slow and steady, completely at ease, in a place he had no reason to trust. His tiny fingers brushed the collar of the expensive suit, creating a contrast so stark it almost hurt to look at wealth and vulnerability pressed together. Neither reacting the way the world expected, Mr. Royce's posture stiffened. He hadn't meant to speak aloud. His eyes flicked up to Maria, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression wasn't composed. There was a small fracture running through the mask he always wore, an unguarded moment of confusion, mixed with something heavier, something disturbingly close to sorrow. He turned slightly, adjusting his grip under the child's legs with a care so natural it didn't belong to a stranger. His fingers supported Liam gently, almost protectively. As if his muscles remembered a movement his mind didn't. The soft leather of the office chair creaked beneath them. But the sound only deepened, the silence that swirled like fog between them. Maria swallowed hard. Her chest tightened with the weight of every warning she'd ever received. Staff were not supposed to bring personal life into executive floors. Staff were not supposed to be seen, not truly. Staff were definitely not supposed to have their children resting against the most powerful man in the building. She took one step forward. Her shoulders rounded slightly, a silent plea forming in her eyes even though she didn't dare voice it. Her body language was shaky, but respectful, chin lowered. Posture cautious, hands partially raised, but Mr. Royce didn't pull away. He didn't recoil from the child. He didn't call security or scold her or demand an explanation. Instead, he stared at Liam with an expression that didn't match his status or his reputation. A look that felt strangely personal. Strangely pained, the atmosphere thickened. Pressing down on all three of them, something had shifted, and none of them could ignore it anymore. And then, without warning, the office door swung open, bringing someone inside, who would instantly make everything far worse. The door opened with a crisp, confident push, breaking the delicate tension like glass under pressure. A senior manager, Ms. Halden, stepped inside without hesitation, her expression sharp, her posture tall, her heels clicking with the assurance of someone who lived comfortably in proximity to power. She carried a tablet against her chest, eyes already fixed on the millionaire as if the rest of the room didn't exist. But then she saw the child. Her steps faltered, just slightly, just enough to betray the shock tightening her expression. Her gaze snapped toward Maria, then back to Mr. Royce, confusion hardening into something far colder. Her eyebrows lifted in disbelief, then dipped into the early formation of judgment. Maria felt the shift instantly. She had felt versions of it her entire life, those brief, cutting moments when someone decided she had crossed a line she never meant to touch. Maria straightened instinctively, hands folding together, knees stiffening. Her face tightened into one practiced expression. Apology without words. She didn't move closer. She didn't speak. She simply stood, waiting for the storm she feared would come. Ms. Halden's shoulders angled toward Mr. Royce, her body language switching into something overly controlled, overly polite, almost protective of him. But the tension in her jaw suggested she believed something unacceptable was happening. Something beneath her standard of order. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly at the sight of Liam resting peacefully against the millionaire's shoulder. A working-class child pressed against a man who signed contracts larger than entire departments' yearly budgets. It didn't fit her world. It didn't fit her rules. It didn't fit the silent hierarchy she enforced with pristine enthusiasm. But what unsettled her most wasn't the child, It was the way Mr. Royce held him. Not awkwardly, not reluctantly. Not with irritation, with familiarity. Ms. Halden opened her mouth to speak, likely to question, reprimand, or demand an explanation, but she hesitated the moment she saw Mr. Royce's expression. He wasn't annoyed. He wasn't dismissive. He looked almost conflicted. Nothing in her training prepared her for a scene like this. Liam shifted again, settling deeper into the man's arms. Completely unaware of the social earthquake he was causing, Maria's stomach twisted. Ms. Halden's composure wavered. The power dynamic in the room bent even further. Ms. Halden slowly exhaled and tightened her grip on the tabitas. If she had just realized this moment needed to be, reported Ms. Halden's fingers tightened against the tablet, the plastic creaking softly beneath her grip. Her expression settled into the poised, icy calm she used whenever she sensed misconduct, especially from employees she believed were replaceable. Her chin lifted a fraction, her shoulders squared, and her eyes landed squarely on Maria, with a weight that felt like accusation before words even formed. Maria felt it instantly. Her breath thinned. Her hands clasped together, so tightly her knuckles whitened beneath the gloves. This was the look she feared more than anger. Polite disapproval wrapped in professionalism. The kind capable of ending jobs quietly with a single documented incident. But Liam still clung to the millionaire. Unaware of the social rules he had just shattered, Miss Halden stepped forward with slow, deliberate control, her body angled slightly toward Mr. Royce, as if shielding him from an inconvenience. But her gaze kept slipping back to the child. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't need volume to assert dominance. Her silence alone pressed against every nerve in the room. Mr. Royce glanced at her, noticing the shift too late. The faint crease returned between his brows, but he didn't move Liam away. He adjusted the child more securely, almost instinctively, the gesture subtle but impossible to miss. Maria's eyes widened. The manager's lips tightened. The atmosphere thickened like humidity before a storm. Ms. Halden's posture grew stiffer, more formal. She angled her tablet as if preparing to take notes. Not now. Not like this. Maria's pulse hammered against her ribs. It wasn't just about the child being in the executive office. It was about the implications, the unspoken assumption that this scene represented some breach of professionalism. Some boundary crossed by someone at the bottom of the hierarchy. She saw it in Ms. Halden's face. A decision forming. A punishment drafting itself in silence. But something unexpected interrupted her. Certainty, Mr. Royce didn't look embarrassed. He didn't seem bothered. His eyes remained on Liam, his expression unsettled but protective. The manager noticed it too. Her confidence faltered for a second, as if she suddenly wasn't sure whose side the situation favored. That single hesitation made the tension sharper. Maria stood silent, waiting for the blow she expected. And Miss Halden finally inhaled, as if preparing to speak. Just as she parted her lips, Mr. Royce raised a hand, small, subtle, but enough to stop her cold. The small motion of Mr. Royce's hand, barely a lift of his fingers, cut through the room with more authority than any raised voice could have. It froze Miss Halden, where she stood. Her lips remained parted, her posture half tilted forward, but she didn't dare finish her sentence. Executives rarely needed to speak to assert power. Subtle gestures carried meaning sharper than words. Maria felt the shift immediately. A strange, fragile relief brushed her chest, fighting with the fear still rooted beneath her ribs. If he was defending her, why? If he wasn't, then what was this? The millionaire adjusted Liam carefully, supporting the child's back with a motion that felt too natural for a man who had never shown interest in anyone's children before. His gaze remained steady, not on the manager, not on Maria, but on the small boy breathing softly against him through the tall windows behind them. The morning light softened, turning his silhouette warmer, almost human in a way that contradicted everything Maria knew about him. Miss Halden straightened slowly, caught between obedience and disbelief. Her body language shifted into something restrained, almost irritated beneath its professionalism. She lowered her tablet slightly, but her fingers stayed tense. the urge to document the scene still hovering in her thoughts. The room tightened around the four of them, Mr. Royce seated, Liam resting against him, Maria frozen in concern, and the manager silently reevaluating her next move. Maria tried again to step closer, but fear anchored her feet. Her eyes darted to Mr. Royce's face for any sign she should take Liam back. But he didn't offer the boy forward. His expression held an unfamiliar softness beneath the confusion, like someone seeing a reflection they didn't expect. The air hummed with unspoken questions. Why did the child trust him? Why did he look unsettled, not annoyed? Why didn't he ask Maria to take Liam? Every rule of hierarchy said this situation should be unacceptable. Yet nothing about his behavior matched that expectation. Then something even more unsettling happened. Liam lifted his tiny head, looked sleepily toward Maria, and then buried his face deeper into the millionaire's chest, gripping tighter. As if refusing to leave, Maria's breath trembled. Miss Halden's eyes sharpened. Mr. Royce stilled completely. The power in the room no longer belonged to status. It belonged to the child, his instinct, his connection, his inexplicable choice. Before anyone could react, Liam whispered a tiny sound, a single soft word that made Mr. Royce's entire body flinch as if struck. The sound was barely a whisper, fragile and breathy, the kind of soft-syllable toddlers murmur when drifting between sleep and waking. But the effect it had on the millionaire was immediate and startling. His spine tensed. His breath paused mid-chest. His eyes widened with a flicker of something that looked dangerously close to recognition. Maria's stomach nodded. She heard it too. A single, simple word. A word Liam had never said to any stranger. Her hands trembled against her apron. She felt the world tilt sideways, the floor beneath her feet suddenly unreliable. Fear pressed behind her ribs, not because of the word itself, but because of what it might imply, something she'd spent years trying to outrun. Mr. Royce leaned back slightly, the leather chair groaning under the shift of his weight. His jaw tightened. His eyes stayed locked on the child, studying him with a level of focus that broke through the polished indifference he wore like armor. The word replayed in his head, quiet but unmistakable, sparking fragments of memory he'd spent too long burying. A baby's cry in a hallway. Papers slid across a desk. A decision made too quickly. A moment swallowed by guilt before guilt had a chance to breathe. But the memories were jumbled, disjointed. They didn't connect clearly. They only stirred an ache deep inside him, one he hadn't felt in years. Across the room, Miss Halden stepped back, confusion tightening her posture. Her eyes darted between the three of them, as if trying to decode a scene that didn't line up with her understanding of power. She was used to employees crossing boundaries, not boundaries crossing themselves. Liam's little hand slid along Mr. Royce's shoulder, fingers brushing his collar again in a movement that felt practiced, familiar, safe. The millionaire swallowed hard, a small tremor running down his throat. It was the first visible crack in his control. Maria felt tears burn at the edges of her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly. She couldn't show emotion, not here. Not under that manager's scrutiny. Not while everything she feared hovered inches from breaking open. She stepped forward, voice trembling in her chest, preparing to ask for her son Beck anything to interrupt the moment spiraling beyond her, grasped. But then Mr. Royce slowly lifted his free hand, placing it gently on Liam's back. As if comforting a child he wasn't supposed to know how to comfort. And in that instant, Ms. Halden's expression shifted because she realized this wasn't a misunderstanding at all. It was a connection that shouldn't exist. The shift in Ms. Halden's expression was subtle, but sharp, an instinctive tightening of her eyes, a faint parting of her lips, the slow stiffening of her posture. She wasn't looking at Liam now. She was looking at Mr. Royce, and then at Maria, and then back again. Something dangerous clicked into place in her mind. Maria felt the change like a cold wind hitting her spine. Her shoulders curled inward, instinctively protective. She knew that look. It was the look people gave when they started forming assumptions that could destroy reputations, jobs, and lives long before anyone spoke a word. Her pulse raced. Her hands tightened against her apron, fingers twisting fabric for balance she didn't feel. Liam let out a soft sigh against the millionaire's chest, tiny body relaxing even further. He wasn't confused or startled by the room's tension. He wasn't reacting to the authority standing inches from him. He melted deeper into the man's arms like someone returning to something familiar, and that was the problem. Mr. Royce stared down at the child with an expression torn between disbelief and something heavier, guilt maybe, or the beginnings of a truth he had avoided for years. His jaw worked quietly, muscles clenching and releasing. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply held the child as if any sudden gesture might break open a memory he wasn't ready to face. Ms. Halden took a slow step closer, her heels silent on the carpet now. Her eyes narrowed the way they did when she reviewed policy violations. But this wasn't policy. This was something she didn't have training for. Something that threatened her sense of order. Something that placed the most powerful man in the building and the least powerful woman in a narrative she didn't understand. Maria felt a wave of dread rise so fast it almost suffocated her. She had guarded her secrets for years, built walls around them, protected them with silence. And now, with one single whispered word from a sleepy child, those walls felt like they were cracking. The air throbbed with tension, sharp, brittle, fragile. Mr. Royce finally lifted his head, meeting Maria's eyes for a single, piercing moment. It wasn't anger or suspicion. It was recognition fighting its way to the surface. And before anyone could speak, a voice echoed from the hallway, calling Mr. Royce's name, followed by footsteps approaching fast. The footsteps grew louder, steady, purposeful, the kind that belonged to someone who never entered a room without expecting it to stop for them. Maria's heart punched upward in her chest. Ms. Halden straightened immediately, smoothing her blazer, pulling her shoulders back into rigid alignment. Even Mr. Royce's posture tightened, his hand still resting gently on Liam's back, but his attention shifting toward the door. The tension that had been contained within the office suddenly expanded, filling every corner like pressure before a structural collapse. The door swung open without warning. Another executive stepped inside. Mr. Keller, head of operations, a man known for sharp opinions and even sharper judgments. His expression came prepared with irritation, likely aimed at some delay or document. But the moment his eyes landed on the scene, Liam against Mr. Royce's chest, Maria, frozen in fear, Ms. Halden's stiff posture, everything in his face tightened. He stopped mid-step, his eyebrows lifted, his mouth pressed into a thin line. Then his gaze sharpened in a way that made Maria's lungs twist painfully. She felt her body shrink inward, instinctively bracing for blame she had not yet been given. Mr. Keller's eyes flicked to Mr. Royce again, studying him carefully, as though trying to assess whether the millionaire himself understood the gravity of the image he was presenting. Liam shifted lightly, pressing his cheek against the expensive fabric. Utterly unbothered by the growing storm, the executive's shoulders rose in a slow, skeptical breath. He didn't speak directly. He didn't need to. The accusation was written across his face, an unspoken question that landed like a blow. Why is this woman's child being held like that? Why does the boy look so comfortable? What connection exists here that shouldn't? Maria felt panic rising up her throat, burning behind her eyes. Every instinct told her to run forward and grab her son, to end the scene before anyone could twist it into something harmful. But fear glued her to the floor. Any sudden movement could look like guilt. Mr. Royce, still silent, still steady, lifted a hand slightly, as if shielding the boy, a gesture that made the room tilt even further. Mr. Keller noticed. His jaw tightened again. Thoughts churned behind his eyes, none of them gentle. The hierarchy in the room was cracking, bending in directions it was never meant to bend, and Maria could feel the danger closing in. Then, in a voice low but unmistakably suspicious, Mr. Keller said a single line that made everyone freeze, including Mr. Royce. "There's something you're not telling us." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended by a thread. Maria felt them slice straight through her chest. Ms. Halden stiffened even further, adopting the kind of rigid professionalism people use when sensing a scandal. And Mr. Royce, he went absolutely still, Liam, unaware of the tremor running through the adults around him, shifted again and rested his small hand against the millionaire's collarbone. The gesture was soft, innocent and wildly inappropriate in the eyes of a room built on hierarchy and distance. Mr. Keller's gaze sharpened with calculation, like the kind of look that saw risk before humanity. He glanced briefly at Mariage just to flicker but enough to make her look away instantly. Shame tightened her throat. Shame layered with fear. Shame she didn't deserve, but had grown used to carrying. Her shoulders curled slightly as if she wanted to disappear into her own shadow. The environment seemed to compress around them. The office felt smaller. The morning light felt colder. Even the leather seats seemed to hold their breath. Mr. Royce drew in a slow inhale, chest rising under the weight of the child. His jaw flexed, as if wrestling with thoughts he didn't have words for. Something in his face, something raw and unguarded, told Maria. He wasn't ignoring the question. He was afraid of the answer. Ms. Halden stepped closer to Mr. Keller, whispering something only he could hear. Her tone was controlled, faintly urgent, the kind that suggested protocol and improper boundaries. Though her voice was quiet, Maria recognized the rhythm. It was the rhythm of people defending rules instead of understanding lives. But Mr. Royce didn't look at them. His eyes were on Liam, searching, asking, resisting something inside himself that kept pushing upward, like a buried truth refusing to stay. Buried Maria felt the panic swell inside her like a rising tide. She had survived years by staying invisible. But now she stood at the center of attention, targeted by suspicion. Trapped between silence and revelation. Her feet shifted back a step. Her fingers curled. Her breath trembled. She wanted to reach for her son, to pull him away, to take control of the moment before it spiraled. But her body refused to move, because the moment she reached out, all eyes would conclude the worst, and the two executives were already circling the idea. Wordlessly stitching together a story she had never told, Mr. Royce finally exhaled. The sound heavier than anything he'd said all morning. And then he looked straight at Maria. Rarely looked and asked, "Ow," in a low, steady voice that made her knees weaken. "Why does he know me?" Maria felt the question hit her like a physical blow. Why does he know me? Her pulse spiked so sharply her vision wavered for a moment. The room blurred around the edges before snapping back into unbearable clarity, the executives watching. The millionaire holding her child, and Liam breathing softly against a stranger's chest as if he'd known him his whole life. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Shame rose, first hot, suffocating, familiar. It curled around her ribs like wire. Then fear followed, settling thick in her throat. She lowered her gaze immediately, shoulders folding inward. Her body instinctively shrinking as if trying to make herself smaller than the moment. The atmosphere in the room shifted again. Colder now, as if unseen walls were closing in. Mr. Keller crossed his arms. Ms. Halden lifted her chin, watching Maria like someone evaluating whether a boundary had been crossed intentionally. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed too loudly. Liam's tiny fingers curled around the fabric of Mr. Royce's suit, tugging softly, seeking closeness. And that closeness was what broke something inside the millionaire. His expression changed. Not fully. Not dramatically. But enough. A shadow passed behind his eyes, the kind that comes from remembering something a person has spent years trying to forget. He studied. Maria carefully knowed her stance. Her trembling hands, the quiet defeat in her posture. It was the way someone would look at a photograph they didn't realize had been taken of them. A recognition he didn't want but couldn't ignore. Maria felt the weight of his stare like heat on her skin. Her breath trembled as she forced her voice to rise, even though it barely made it past her lips. She didn't answer the question. She couldn't. Any explanation would sound like a confession, one she had no power to defend. Silence stretched until it became unbearable. Mr. Royce turned slightly in his chair, his hand resting on the child's back, as if grounding both himself and Liam. His mind flickered with fragmented images, brief flashes of a younger version of himself. A mistake made in ignorance, a consequence he assumed had been resolved long ago. But the fragments refused to connect cleanly. Something inside him was unraveling, Something inside Maria was collapsing. And something inside the executives was sharpening into quiet judgment. A hierarchy that once stood like steel pillars now felt unstable, bending under a truth no one dared name out loud. Then, without warning, Liam lifted his head and reached out one tiny hand toward Mr. Royce's face, as if recognizing someone he was never supposed to know. Liam's small hand brushed the side of Mr. Royce's face. Gentle, curious, trusting. A touch so innocent, it should have meant nothing. But it meant everything. The millionaire froze. His breath halted. His pupils tightened. A tremor passed through his jaw, subtle but unmistakable. Maria's knees weakened. She clutched the edge of a nearby table just to stay upright. Embarrassment flushed hot across her cheeks, not because of anything wrong Liam had done, but because the room was watching her child reach for a man he shouldn't know. A man whose life, income, and influence existed galaxies away from theirs. The executives reacted instantly. Mr. Keller tilted his head slightly, suspicion deepening into something colder, more calculated. He wasn't just judging. He was investigating. His arms folded tighter, chest rising with impatience, as if demanding a confession Maria didn't have words for Ms. Halden. Meanwhile, masked her shock with professional restraint. Her face held an expression somewhere between disapproval and alarm. The kind that said she believed rules had been broken, serious rules. She took a quiet step back, not out of fear, but to observe more clearly. As if assembling evidence piece by piece, Maria felt her heartbeat thudding painfully behind her ribs. Every part of her wanted to reach forward, to grab her son, to pull him away from the danger forming in these silent assumptions. But her legs wouldn't move. Any sudden motion now could be read as panic or guilt. And the room already felt poised to believe the worst of her. But Mr. Royce didn't push the child away. He didn't recoil. He didn't even blink. He stared at Liam with a look that carved deeper into his mask recognition, battling denial. Memories flashing behind his eyes like broken film. His face softened for a heartbeat, then tightened again. As if something inside him hurt in a way he couldn't control, the air thickened further. Heavy and electric, Maria saw the exact moment his composure fractured. The wealthy man who always looked unshakable now seemed human, conflicted, unsteady. A man confronting a truth he didn't know how to face. The executives caught it too. And the room's power shifted again, tilting dangerously toward a revelation. None of them were prepared for. Liam leaned in closer. Still reaching, still trusting, and Mr. Royce finally whispered, voice barely audible, "This feels familiar." Before anyone could react, Miss Halden stepped forward and said she was calling HR immediately, forcing a collision the truth could no longer escape. Miss Halden's words cut through the air like a blade. Calling HR? Not a suggestion. Not a question. A decision. Maria felt the ground drop beneath her feet. Her breath caught mid-inhalation, trembling inside her chest. HR wasn't just oversight in places like this. HR meant protocols, investigations, reports written by people who never bothered to learn the truth behind the people they disciplined. HR meant scrutiny she could not survive. Her throat tightened painfully. Her palms dampened inside her gloves. Shame rose so violently it left her dizzy. She hadn't done anything wrong. But innocence didn't matter, not when power weighed the scale. Liam shifted at the sudden tension, letting out a tiny, confused whimper. The sound was soft, fragile, and it hit Mr. Royce like a strike to the ribs. He looked up sharply, for the first time that morning. Authority flashed through his expression, not cold, not cruel, but protective in a way Maria had never seen from him. His shoulders squared, his jaw clenched. His hand instinctively tightened around the child as if shielding him from something unseen. It was a movement no one expected, not from a man like him. Ms. Halden froze mid-step. Startled by the sudden shift, the certainty in her posture wavered. She glanced at Mr. Keller as if seeking permission, but he remained silent. Watching everything unfold with the keen focus of someone sensing a deeper story beneath the surface, Maria felt her heart lurch painfully. She had never imagined the day would come when someone powerful might actually defend her, let alone her child.
But this wasn't protection she could trust. This wasn't safety she could hold. This was a fragile moment suspended between revelation and disaster. Mr. Royce lifted his eyes to Maria again, longer this time, deeper, something unraveling inside him. His gaze carried questions he didn't know how to ask, regret he didn't know how to hide, and a dawning fear he didn't know how to control. Why does this child feel familiar? Why does his touch feel known? What truth did he once bury that was now clawing its way back to the surface? Maria felt her legs trembling. Her voice rose in her throat, desperate to speak, desperate to stop the moment from spiraling. But she never got the chance. Because before she could say a single word, Mr. Royce finally broke. He stood up slowly, deliberately, holding Liam against his chest like something irreplaceable, and the entire room stopped. In that stillness, Mr. Royce said the one sentence that shattered every assumption in the room. "I need everyone out except her." The command struck the room with the force of something final. "I need everyone out except her." For a full second, no one moved. Not Miss Haldon, not Mr. Keller, not even Maria, whose breath had stopped entirely. Mr. Royce stood with the child held firmly against his chest, one hand supporting Liam's back, the other steadying the small legs resting at his side. His expression wasn't the polished mask he wore for boardrooms. It wasn't even the conflicted look from minutes earlier. It was something rawer, something stripped of position, protocol, and the quiet arrogance of power. It was the look of a man facing a truth he could no longer ignore. Miss Haldon was the first to react. Her posture stiffened, disbelief shaking the edges of her composure. She opened her mouth as if to protest, invoking policy, chain of command, propriety. But the billionaire didn't even look at her. His gaze remained locked on Maria with an intensity that made her feel naked in a way shame had never done. Mr. Keller's jaw tightened. He studied the scene with narrowed eyes, as if calculating the implications, the risks, the scandals. But one look at Mr. Royce's face told him the order was final. Absolute, not up for debate. Slowly, reluctantly, he stepped toward the door. Miss Haldon followed, unsettled, her fingers trembling around her tablet. She moved with the rigid precision of someone forced into silence against her will. But she cast one last look at Maria, sharp, suspicious, threatening in its own quiet way. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing Maria and the millionaire into a silence that felt heavy enough to collapse the walls. Maria's breath quivered. Her knees softened. She took a step back automatically, the instinct of a woman who had lived her life navigating danger with silence and humility. But Mr. Royce took a step forward. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. Liam's breathing the only soft sound in the space between them. Maria kept her gaze low at first, terrified of the question she saw forming in his stance. His body language changed, shoulders squared, but his chest rising with unsteady breaths. A man holding power but not control. When she finally forced herself to look up, she found him staring at her with a mix of fear and recognition that made her heart stumble. Not suspicion, not judgment, not accusation. Something closer to grief. He shifted Liam slightly, and the child curled closer with effortless trust. Maria's hands shook. She knew this moment was the one she had spent years preparing for, the moment she prayed would never come. And then, voice low and unsteady, Mr. Royce asked the question that could destroy both of them. "Maria, is he mine?" The words hit Maria harder than any accusation ever could. "Is he mine?" Her knees almost buckled. Her hand shot out to the edge of a chair, gripping it so tightly her knuckles pushed white beneath the glove. She had rehearsed this moment in nightmares, in lonely late-night whispers, in prayers whispered into the darkness. But rehearsing fear is never the same as facing it. Liam shifted gently against the millionaire's chest, his small fingers curling into the fabric, as if grounding the moment in innocence neither adult could afford. Mr. Royce stood motionless, but everything in his expression betrayed the stillness. The tension in his jaw, the tightness around his eyes, the sharp rise of his chest with every controlled breath. He looked like a man staring at the edge of a truth he spent years refusing to acknowledge. Maria couldn't look at him. Her chin dipped, her shoulders folded, her eyelids squeezed shut as if blocking out the world might make the question disappear. The atmosphere thickened with something far more dangerous than accusation. Hope. Hope mixed with dread, hope mixed with guilt, hope mixed with the possibility of a past catching up to both of them. Her voice tried to form words, but her throat refused to cooperate. It felt like something inside her was cracking under the weight of fear she had carried alone for so long. Mr. Royce took one slow step toward her. Just one. But that single step collapsed the distance between power and vulnerability. Between the billionaire and the cleaning lady. Between a man burdened by a mistake and a woman who had lived its consequences. Maria finally forced herself to look up. She saw it in his face, raw, unfiltered emotion pulling him apart. Not anger, not blame, something more painful, regret. Regret he didn't yet understand. Her breath shook as she tried to speak. But no words came out. Liam, sensing the tension without understanding it, lifted his head. His innocent eyes looked between them, confused, quiet, searching for comfort in the adults who seemed to be falling apart. The silence grew unbearable. Maria's heartbeat thundered. The truth clawed its way to the surface. Her mouth parted again. Her voice finally broke loose, trembling, fragile, barely more than a whisper. But before she could answer, something shifted in Mr. Royce's expression. Recognition. Pain. A memory he had buried so deep it had taken a child's touch to drag it back into the light. And then, as if the truth struck him first, Mr. Royce whispered a trembling line that stole Maria's breath. "I remember that night." The moment he said it, "I remember that night," Maria felt every muscle in her body lock. Her lungs froze mid-breath. The room tilted. The past, which she had sealed away behind years of silence and survival, rushed back with suffocating clarity. Mr. Royce's eyes lowered, not in shame, but in shock at his own confession. His voice had not been planned. It had escaped him, pulled from somewhere deep, somewhere painful. Liam's small hand rested on his shoulder, grounding a man who had spent his entire adult life floating above consequences. He sank slowly into the chair behind him, Liam still in his arms. The billionaire's posture collapsed in a way Maria had never seen. His elbows rested on his knees, his hand supporting the boy as though afraid to let go. His expression changed again, no longer confusion, no longer fear, something older, something raw, something shaped by a memory returning in pieces. Maria watched as he spoke quietly into the silence, his voice shaking in the slightest, like someone reliving an old scar. He remembered the charity event, the crowded ballroom, the noise, the exhaustion, the moment he slipped away from the chaos, searching for quiet. The young woman cleaning up in the hallway, startled by his presence. He remembered offering her water, conversation, a moment of humanity stripped of status. He remembered the connection, brief, fragile, unexpected. He remembered the loneliness that followed his success like a ghost. He remembered the decision afterward and the guilt he buried behind work, wealth, and distance. But he hadn't remembered her, not until now, not until he saw her eyes trembling across the room. Not until the boy's touch pulled something old back to the surface. Maria's breath trembled deeply, shaking through her entire frame. She had replayed that night 1,000 times. How kind he was, how unexpected his warmth had been, how she never imagined her life would pivot because of it. But he was a man with an empire, and she was never more than a moment in the background of his world. He took another shaky breath, eyes flickering between her and Liam, and suddenly he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a powerful name. He was just a man breaking under the weight of memory. Maria's tears finally spilled over, because she knew what he was realizing, and she knew what he would ask next. Before he could speak again, the office door rattled. Someone was trying to come back in. The door handle jerked sharply, once, twice, followed by an urgent knock that shattered the fragile silence holding the room together. Maria flinched. Mr. Royce stiffened. Liam's tiny arms tightened around his neck. The world outside, policies, hierarchy, judgment, refused to stay out, and they all knew it. Before the billionaire could answer, the door cracked open just enough for Miss Halden's tense voice to slip through. She didn't enter, she wouldn't dare without permission, but the urgency in her tone betrayed what waited on the other side of that door. "Sir, HR is here. They said it cannot wait." Maria's breath caught painfully. HR, already. How quickly rumors traveled when power was involved. She felt the floor tilt beneath her, the world she had tried to protect for years threatening to crash down in minutes. Mr. Royce's jaw locked. He turned his head slightly, shielding Liam with an instinct he hadn't had an hour ago. His voice came out low, commanding, cracking none of the fear that raged inside him. No one enters this room. His tone stopped the manager cold. Even from behind the door, Maria could hear her hesitation, confusion tangled with the fear of defying him. She retreated, leaving the door shut but the pressure unmistakable. People were gathering. Executives, HR staff, curious eyes. Whispers born from assumptions. Maria stepped back as if the noise outside were heat pushing her away. Her posture folded again, chin low, shoulders tight, hands trembling at her sides. The shame came first. It always did. Shame that wasn't hers but clung to her anyway, shaped by a lifetime of being looked at as if she didn't belong anywhere but the background. Mr. Royce saw it, and something inside him snapped. He stood again, holding Liam close, his expression shifting from fear to resolve, like a man who finally saw the consequences of every silence he'd allowed. He took a step toward her, then another. Maria backed up, overwhelmed, tears streaking uneven lines down her cheeks. She tried to speak, tried to tell him not to do anything reckless, not to bring more danger onto her or her son, but no words formed. He gently placed a hand on the back of a chair, steadying himself as if grounding the decision forming inside him. Maria, his voice cracked. I should have known. I should have looked for you. I should have. She shook her head violently, unable to bear hearing forgiveness tied to guilt. Her hands lifted defensively, pleading silently for him to stop. But then Liam leaned back, looked right at the billionaire's face, and smiled. A small, innocent, unmistakably familiar smile. It broke something in both adults at the same time. Maria sobbed softly. Mr. Royce exhaled a breath that sounded like surrender. The truth between them no longer whispered, it roared. And just as the hallway outside grew louder, the billionaire finally spoke the words that terrified Maria more than anything else. I'm not letting HR touch this situation, because I'm not losing my son again. The word son fell into the room like a drop of ink into clear water, spreading, staining, transforming everything it touched. Maria's breath collapsed. Her knees wobbled so sharply she stumbled back into the edge of the desk. She covered her mouth with her gloved hands, sobbing silently, the kind of cry born from years of fear finally meeting a truth too heavy to hold. Outside the door, footsteps multiplied. Whispers rose. HR voices murmured orders. A shadow passed under the doorframe. The world was swarming, circling, ready to make assumptions that could destroy her life in minutes. But inside the office, something deeper was unfolding. Mr. Royce held Liam closer. His face, once polished, unreadable, untouchable, now looked stripped bare. His eyes glistened, jaw trembling with a pain he couldn't hide anymore. He gently pressed his forehead against the child's soft hair, closing his eyes in a slow, breaking exhale. He whispered under his breath, not to Maria, not to the room, but to the little boy who had unknowingly reopened the past. I should have never let you go. The words shattered Maria all over again. Years of silence, years of shielding. Years of raising a child alone while hiding the truth to protect him from a world that judged too quickly and forgave too slowly. She took one step forward, her voice trembling in a way she had never allowed in front of anyone. I didn't ask you for anything. Her words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They were soaked in pain, indignity, in all the hidden nights she endured alone. Mr. Royce looked at her, really looked. No superiority, no distance. Just raw regret pulling every feature tight. He shook his head, swallowing a breath that seemed to burn on its way up. I know, and that is what destroys me most. The hallway grew louder. HR insisted again. Hands jiggled the handle. Policies pushed against the door like an oncoming wave. But he didn't let them in. He didn't even turn toward them. With calm, deliberate strength, he shifted Liam to one arm and walked toward Maria. Slowly, carefully, as if approaching someone who had been hurt too many times. He stopped inches from her. His hand rose, not to take, not to demand, but to offer. A gesture asking permission rather than asserting authority. Something she never thought she'd see from him. Maria hesitated, then nodded through her tears. He placed his free hand over hers, steadying her trembling fingers. The door rattled again. But the three of them stood in the center of the storm, untouched. For the first time, they faced it together. And when he turned toward the door at last, his voice dropped into a tone that silenced the entire hallway. Before HR enters, they will hear the truth from me.